I would describe it that the concept that we have been developing with the museum is the idea that once this fairy tale world, fantastical world, existed above ground, which is sunken and captured into the underground world as a fantasy world. And his fairy tale are told through the spaces and scenographic setup. So visitors would experience fully to the extent in the exhibition spaces that are set up underground. Above ground, it's a projections of the fairy tale that are sunken into the underground world. And the hedges traces actually the activities or the tales that are happening underneath the museum, the exhibition spaces. So both coexist, like in his story, like back to back. And this sense of duality is quite present in the spatial compositions of the museum. The garden, it is quite unique because this was our inspirations by visiting some residential areas near Odense, that these hedges are used in a very unique and creative way to softly separate the boundaries and to use it to filter the privacy and invisibility. And this was creating some very unique combinations of the architecture and the controlled nature, natural element. So hedge, for us, it's something that represents in the very typical urban and nature scene in Denmark that we thought it's relevant to implement into our project. So it has a lot to do with this Andersen's fairy tale concept of relating to the usual, but then it turns into unusual. So always this back-to-back duality of imaginations and realities are represented into the sense of garden as well. We took the strategy of implementing the circular geometry. This makes the story non-central, and there's no hierarchy between the spaces. When you combine the circles together and to connect into this manner, sometimes you fall into the interior spaces, but then when you go out and start walking around it, you are thrown into the situation in between the outside and inside. So this chain of the spaces that makes the experience very unique and ambiguous. So you sort of feel this sense of lost in the spaces and a bit sense of disorientation. This makes it more detached from the reality of the above ground and into the below ground. So that's how we decided to compose the entire museum out of a series of circular shapes. I believe these unique integrations of the real nature as the material to create the architecture is something very specific for this Hans Christian Andersen Museum, which we haven't tried in any other projects that exist in this office, which is control with the hedges, creating the open and closed spaces with the natural element. Of course, we have utilized the timbers and stones and so on, but the living trees that are shaped to engage and enclose the spaces is something very, very new. And it's a new challenge because it's an organic living element, unlike the treated or cut trees that are applied as a building material. So this is very difficult to achieve. At the same time, makes it the most intriguing experience that are very specific to this museum. We design both from outside in, inside out at the same time. So to look at the buildings or the architecture from an urban point of view, like you're flying over, like a bird's eye view, but at the same time, you need to see yourself being inside to see out. And to the micro level of the material, how one feels the material inside, and to become a scale of enclosing the architecture. So it's not the process for us that we decide only the bigger volumes, and then we will figure out what's going on inside. But this to see and imagine and test the scale and the views and the experience inside at the same time of designing the outside, it's something very particular in our practice. from the beginning, we wanted to design this architecture. It's about experiencing and phenomena of natural elements into the architecture, how the lights and shadow reacts, rather than creating the shape that calls out for an attention. And yes, in a way that it's a general approach in our office, and Kengo Kuma and myself, that the architecture should not be a monument, but it's something that needs to be organically grown into the land where it stands. So yes, this was intentionally made as such. The Little Mermaid, I wanted to create the sensations of this sense of longing, where the Little Mermaid are at the bottom of the ocean and look up through the very small portals. And we would run the shallow water to simulate the sensations of being under the water. However, the underground is rather obscure and very subtle lights. You would have a visual connections from undergrounds to visitors above, but you cannot hear them, you cannot speak to them, you cannot communicate with them. So this sense of longing and sense of this would be replicated, but like these rooms, we don't necessarily tell the story, but it gives the sensation of how the protagonist would feel in his fairy tale. So there's a series of moments as such that we wanted to express by the sensations and experience rather than just telling the story of as is.